Great to see so many familiar faces. And for those of you I haven't met yet, I'm Amy McIsaac, Managing Director of PACE. I'm joined by my colleagues, Siri, if you want to give a wave, and Cam, if you could give a wave. So the PACE team is here to help sure this hour is smooth and valuable to you all. And Shannon, our CEO, sends her regards from Yellowstone, where she's spending a couple days with her family in the national park. So we are thrilled for her. As we get started, if you could just, this is going to be very casual. This is a conversation session, less webinar. We're going to keep this in the full group. There's no deck. So it'd be great if in the chat you could just introduce your name, your organization, and if you've seen The Odyssey yet this summer, because I need to know who I can talk to about how amazing this movie was. So if you could let us know if you've already checked out that movie. If you haven't, you've got to. It's so good. It's also great to see so many PACE members on the call. For those of you who are not members, PACE is a community of funders who are working together to strengthen American democracy through active civic participation. And while we have lots of types and stripes of grant makers in our membership, one phrase that has been coming up over and over and over again in conversation is democracy must deliver for people. And I most commonly hear this when people are trying to, for example, make sense of the democracy decline we've seen in the US and around the globe over the last 20 years. Freedom House documents this well. Cam will put that in the chat for a link to that report. I also hear this phrase a lot when folks are grappling with youth satisfaction, or should I say dissatisfaction with democracy. Cam will put another piece that references that in the chat. So when I hear someone say democracy is in decline in the US, or, for example, young Americans are dissatisfied with democracy, I usually hear someone in the back of the crowd say, well, of course, because democracy is not delivering for people. So we wanted to talk about this and really get underneath what it means for democracy to deliver for people. What does that look like? What could be different if democracy was delivering for people? And relevant to all of us, how do you fund that? What does that look like to fund democracy delivering for people? And lucky for us, we have some folks in the PACE network, some of your fellow members who have experience and expertise in this area. So I am joined by Dr. Raphe Sonenshein, the executive director of the John Randolph Haynes and Dora Haynes Foundation, which is based in LA, and Jessica Richards, the program director for democracy and civic initiatives at the William Penn Foundation in Pennsylvania. So welcome, Raphe and Jessica. Good to have you all. I'm going to spend some time peppering them with some questions I have on this topic, and then we're going to open up the second half of the time as really an ask me anything. So let's make this a real conversation. Please be ready to offer questions, but also reflections, or if you've had experiences thinking about how you align grant making around democracy delivering for people, we want to hear from you. We'll keep this really, really conversational. So, Rafe and Jessica, I'm going to start at a very high, almost philosophical level on this, and then we'll get to strategies and mechanics and kind of the grant making of it all. But first, what does it mean for democracy to deliver, in your opinion? And kind of an underlying question there is like, how is that different from government delivering? Can you speak to that? And Rafe, let's start with you.
Good to see everybody. Thanks, Amy. I think, and Jessica, good to be with you. Let's start a little bit, 1 second on history, because that's how we got here. About 30, 35 years ago, we wouldn't have had this conversation because after the fall of the Berlin Wall, everybody thought democracy was going to dominate everywhere in the world. So nobody bothered wondering whether it was delivering anything to anybody. It was a non-competitive environment. What has really changed for us is democracy has to deliver not against its own aspirations, but against competition from authoritarianism. That's what's changed our world in many ways. And that has suddenly opened up this question of delivering. And I would say delivery is a couple of different things. We have to show not only that government can deliver services to people in an effective way, because authoritarian governments deliver a lot of services in their own effective way, but that there's something special about the democratic engagement with government which only democracy offers. So I think this whole comparative thing is worth considering, which is it's not just about being more efficient. It's just not about getting out more services, because lots of forms of government can do that. It's balancing and incorporating the people in the delivery of those services. So, but that means you've got to have better governance that even questions all the processes of government to make sure they're delivering things effectively to people. And that can be a conflict. And we'll talk about that today, about what happens when foundations jump in to try to make government deliver better, where the resistance lines are. But it's urgent now because we've always got another system, another competitor looking over our shoulders. That wasn't true 30 years ago.
Really interesting lens of the like, how does this product deliver better than another product, so to speak, to be kind of crude with that language, but it's one way to think about it. Jessica, how do you think about this? Like, what does it mean for democracy to deliver for people, and is that different from government?
Yeah, I mean, I'll plus one a lot of what Rafe said already in terms of what makes democracy special in this way is the sense that it should be delivering what the people have said they want,
Right.
not necessarily what the leader has said that they want, not necessarily what the party has said that they want, but we as the people have the opportunity to sign on to one of those things and to express which of them is the direction that the country, the state, the locality, depending on what scale you're looking at, should be going. Um, Government is the delivery mechanism. There are other ways we could organize our societies to deliver what people need to make their lives better, but government is the major one. Um, and so making sure that democracy delivers to me means that the will of the people is connected to the actions of the government, which then cycle around to meet that will.
Yeah, love that framing for us. So it's a pretty simple concept that we're talking about, right? It's like people have lives, they have things in their lives, and how do we help, or how does government, how does a communal approach to making that better quantity, quality, how does that work? Help me understand, Rafe and Jessica, there's so many things under the umbrella of democracy giving, democracy funding right now that you could have really invested in and thought about as an institution. Why have you taken on responsive local government as a focus? Like, why is that important in terms of the work that you guys do at your respective foundations? And this time, let's start with Jessica.
Sure. Thanks, Amy. So, our Democracy and Civic Initiatives program at William Penn Foundation is new as of summer of 2024. So we went through a strategic planning process with our board, included a lot of community and stakeholder engagement to gather information on what people in Philadelphia and Southeastern PA thought was really important. And the board had strong feelings about how we should build on recent work in helping people participate in elections, census redistricting to make that into a more formal program. And when we took that as kind of a tester program out to the field as part of the stakeholder engagement, said, what do you think of this? Would this actually meet your needs? Do you want to do this work? A lot of grantees told us we absolutely do, and we can't while government doesn't deliver for people. So we would love to get voter turnout higher. We would love to get people to self-respond to the census. If they feel that taking those actions does not make a difference to the material conditions of their lives, they will make a very rational choice not to waste their time on it. So we have to also see a line of work that is about making sure that people in Philadelphia are actually experiencing benefits from putting themselves out there to take civic actions. And so that's really where this funding objective that we call responsive local government, responsive, accountable local government came from, was really from our grantees and community members who said, we have to do this too.
Rafe, how about you? Why has this become an important part of the way Haynes Foundation thinks about its grant making?
It's remarkably similar to what Jessica said, which is that our board, we're a 100-year organization this year, and we've been giving grants in areas like governance and democracy, but many other areas. But the board grew dissatisfied, feeling we weren't really hitting a core topic. And they went out before I came on board 3 years ago and surveyed the community stakeholders and others, just as Jessica's describing, and came up with the notion that we should do two sides of a coin, governance and democracy in the LA region. We were already local. We've been local for 100 years. But by doing both governance and democracy, our board really hit that first one very hard because there's such a robust conversation about democracy, but very little about governance. And to follow up what Jessica's saying, people will tell you if you're not delivering governance that serves people, the democratic argument gets really weak after a while. It becomes kind of attenuated. Why would I bother, especially for a young person, if they see a street light not going up in a place where there's accidents? It's kind of like but that of course becomes the way to draw them in is fix that, fix things. So I think we actually came to this in a similar way from across the country.
I love that. So it's about listening to people. They're telling you what they want. Let's make this more effective is in terms of delivery. You guys are a bit into this. I know you're somewhat new in this space, but you got some traction under you. How would you like what is going well here for you, and what is maybe not going well in taking on this priority within your foundation? Jessica, I'll start back with you again.
Sure. So in terms of what's going well, I think to talk a little bit about the actual mechanisms of how we're doing this work and funding organizations. Like, I feel like it's important for us to say up front that we totally abdicated the how should you fund this effort to the applicants and grantees. So we're now doing most of our funding in open call RFPs. We say this is the goal is to improve responsiveness and accountability of local government. And then we leave it to them to tell us, like, what is the lever that needs to be pulled to make that happen. And so the applicant pool in our first couple rounds of funding this through RFPs has been very wide and varied in really interesting ways. So I think as a relatively new entrant to this kind of funding, it's been a great learning opportunity from a staff perspective, from a board perspective of what is the work that people think needs to be done to improve the situation here. And, that has run the gamut from organizing and advocacy campaigns outside of local government. It includes journalism and media. It includes technical assistance projects with the city of Philadelphia. It includes improved engagement processes that the city has itself proposed to do. So we're really looking to fund both efforts that are led by government and efforts that are led outside of government and efforts that marry those two to work together. And that part, I think, has been very successful. In terms of what is not going well, there is so much more demand than there is funding available to support these things. So from the funder seat, there's some really hard choice making in terms of like, what are we picking that looks like it might be effective, knowing that like, you're going to take a swing on this, not everything's going to work. You have to be able to take some risks. Not all of them are going to work. Where are we putting those risks? What does the funding portfolio look like as a relatively new program? And therefore, what messages are we sending to the field about what matters in this and what we want to support? I think we need to pay some continual attention to that because there's messages in that too about what we think is important.
Let me a follow-on question for you, Jess, before I go to Rafe. I love that the RFP is kind of guiding your own understanding and definition of the space. Are there things that are coming through the RFP process that are like you didn't think about in this context, but you're actually pretty convinced it belongs there? And I'm also curious, like, if there are things that are coming and you're like, that is very out of scope, like from what I understand it to be, like things that like where are those lines starting to be drawn for you as you're reading through that?
Yeah, I think it has frequently revealed the gap in understanding about who is responsible for what in governing. So we are still receiving proposals to change things that are decided at the state level that our local government does not have any control over and cannot make a difference to. So it's super important issues. It matters to people. We can't fund you to influence the city of Philadelphia about it because they don't control that. So I think it does reveal a level of work around when we're talking about helping democracy deliver. There is a side of the coin that's about helping people understand what they can expect. And sometimes that's the gap as much as it is on the government delivering side.
Helping people determine what they can expect. That's really interesting. Rafe, let's turn to you. What's been working? What's been not going so well as you guys have been begun here?
I want to pick up on the tail end of what Jessica said because it rings so many bells.
Hmm.
Surveys show people trust their local government much more than they trust the national government, but they also have absolutely no clue what the local government does and who does it, whether it's the city or the county. I know from talking to Jessica, Philadelphia is a county city consolidated like San Francisco. LA is not. We just had a fire in Boyle Heights the other day, and it was unclear whether the county or the city was involved in fixing it. So you have this mix of very, very low civic knowledge, yet tremendous potential to engage people around things they can see and feel in their community. And it's a way of remembering that our hope for democracy going forward is probably right now not going to be at the national level. It's going to be at the local level and the county level and the state where there's all these opportunities for experimentation. I will say that in LA, we're in the middle of a massive wave of governance reform, which, as always happens in LA, is set off by a catastrophe of which we have many. We had the release of recordings in 2022 that you may have heard about, racist recordings that tore the city apart. And now the city and county are doing fundamental change more at the county level than at the city level, which has historically been a big interest of our foundation. So you've got this huge opportunity for governance reform, and a lot of people not knowing whether they live in the city of Los Angeles or the county of Los Angeles. And in fact, if you go a block, you'd have to see the street signs change to know you're in either a different city or a different unincorporated territory. So we have to do both. We have to fix the structures, and that's a lot of work. But you're constantly keeping in mind, what does it mean for people at the street level? Do they see it? Do they know who the government is? Do they know who they're elected? Everybody knows who the president is, but they don't trust the federal government. They don't know who the local officials are, but they trust the local government more. But still, the trust level is still not very high.
Yeah, this is a really interesting point, Jess and Rafe, that you make for those of us that are also, or, who are investing in the civic education space about like what is local government, state government, civic education beyond the basic tenets. So it's really interesting to think through. I have just a couple more questions and then we're going to open up to ask me anything. So really ask the group, ask Jessica and Rafe, ask whoever if you've got thoughts and things that you're thinking through as you might be either in this kind of grant making or thinking about this kind of grant making. I'll start with Rafe this time, but talk to us about metrics. Like what metrics do you pay attention to when assessing if democracy is delivering? What does that look like? And I will, this is a bit of a spoiler because I know that you guys just made a huge grant to USC to think about the tools to measure effectiveness at the county level. So maybe that's related to how you would respond, maybe something more, but help us understand how you measure this.
Well, you can only measure some of it quantitatively. A
Yeah.
lot of the relationship between the government and the people is not always a quantitative matter of services delivered, results reported, but you have to have reporting results.
Yeah.
And we are now dedicating ourselves to the word outcomes because local government often delivers processes, not outcomes. And the big grant we just gave, which for us is quite large, $1.5 million to USC, is to go to the county of LA and try to help them establish outcomes for all their departments in what they deliver and do that in a community engaged process so the community can tell the county what those outcomes are. It raises an interesting question, though. How do you deal with the government when you're coming in as philanthropy? And the image I'd like to give you is a satellite orbiting around a planet, which is you want to be close enough to the planet that you can be helpful so that you're not flying off into the universe with academic stuff that doesn't help them. But you also don't want to get pulled in totally to the gravitational pull of these large governments that could say, well, yeah, we're running short of money. Can you come in and close our budget deficit and deliver services for us and be our research associates when we'll control the results of the research? So we consider ourselves helpful independents to the county government in this project, can you imagine that's going to be a work in progress when some of the research maybe says you should change some of the ways you do things? But it has to be a little bit of that satellite orbiting, I think, but holding on to that orbit.
Jessica, what about you? How do you guys think about metrics?
Yeah, let me first say I'm really excited to see how that grant turns out, Rafe. I'll be interested in what kind of outcomes they identify, how the work gets done. I think that that'll be a great opportunity for us to learn too from what comes out of that, even if it's not specifically for our county.
Mhm.
So in terms of outcomes here, our mission, our programs, this particular funding objective are now kind of organized around the people aspect of it. And so what we are measuring going forward is how Philadelphians feel about local government, um, which we're doing through a survey. We are very fortunate in Philadelphia to have Pew Charitable Trust's Philadelphia Research and Policy Institute in town. They have been, for decades, been running a state of the city, citywide survey, producing a report that tells us all kinds of interesting measures about the city, but also has been asking for decades, is the city of Philadelphia headed in the right direction? And in the past version of State of the City, they also added a couple questions for us about if you had a problem on your block, do you know who to call? When your city council members make decisions, do they listen to people like you? So we're getting kind of a sentiment look at how perceptions are changing over time. We also work with the Lenfest Institute for Journalism, another super great Philadelphia-based entity that runs citywide polling as well on specific issue areas that have been prioritized by the mayor and her administration for this term. So what's interesting thing about those things is you'll get kind of the signal of how perceptions about the city are changing. It's also somewhat impossible to separate from the larger context, what's going on in the city, what's happening in the world. Um, Perceptions of what direction the city's going in were very positive in the last version of State of the City. And if they had run that survey 3 weeks later, we would have been in the middle of a trash strike. And so the results probably would have come out a little bit different. Um, so I think that's something that we think about going forward is for the big measure. You know, those measures are for us. Did we fund anything that made a difference over 10 years? We're also always asking grantees in their applications and in conversations before the grant, like, what are you measuring? What does success look like to you? If you're a base building organization trying to, achieve a particular policy change, yeah, the policy change is a win, but also are there interim measures of who's joined your cause? How much engagement are you getting from community members? If we funded programs before that are functionally adult civic education to walk people through what's a change you want to see in your neighborhood? How would you achieve that? Who do you need to help you? And they kind of map out what is the project that this individual who's participating in this program wants to do. And there, the measure of success is, did they put something together? Did they figure out who to talk to? Did they get the meeting? Did anything happen afterwards? And it's yes and no in varying ways. So we're also looking at kind of the grant outputs in addition to the big question for us at the foundation about whether or not we've made a difference in how people feel about local government.
Yeah. It strikes me that this particular area, I mean, forgive the business analogies. I took a lot of business classes, but like the the customer satisfaction of democracy is hyper volatile, right? It feels incredibly recency biased. And so measuring it does feel like a unique beast in how you would track that over time. And you could get a measure that is like truly on the heels of a trash strike, like you said, Jessica, that isn't quite representative of a longer term sentiment. So I didn't really
And
think.
like Alex is saying in the chat, if we just had a big snowstorm and they haven't finished the plowing yet, you're going to get a lot of dissatisfaction then. Uh,
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
also have a working theory that, if we are funding enough things in the city the size of Philadelphia, you might actually see a J curve in this before you saw any improvement. The measures might get worse as people understand better what should be happening and isn't happening
Mhm.
before they've had a chance to actually affect improved outcomes.
And it also makes me think about like at the end of the day, people don't know if the people's lives are going well and they don't see the invisible work of things working around them, that's kind of a win too, right? It's like things are working, so they it's like, what is the marketing, again, business, what is a marketing campaign
Yeah.
for like when government is delivering and you don't even notice it? Like I checked my phone this morning. I had to know what the weather was going to be to know how to dress my kids for camp. That is part of government delivering for me, is being able to give me that information. I don't even think about that and make that connection. So it's an interesting, it's very layered.
Mm,
Um,
very. Yeah,
um,
You
it's
know,
also just
yeah.
one more
yeah.
point on that survey. Since we do get to benefit from the Pew research, they can also disaggregate how is the city moving in the right direction question going? And actually underneath the data, it breaks down in all the ways that you think it would,
Mm,
based on income, neighborhood safety, race, education level, employment rates, and so on. So it can also tell us some interesting things about who the city is delivering for.
mhm. So before we open it up, I just want to talk a little bit more. It's kind of been peppered in how you, Jessica, and Rafe have answered some of the questions I've already been curious and posed to you about. But I want to kind of get to the philanthropy of it all. So there's democracy delivering for people, the government delivering for people, and then there's like funding that, which is like two parts of this conversation. And Jessica, you talked about the RFP process that you guys are in this round, and Rafe, you talked about the partnership with USC, but can you talk to us as a group of funders around how do you fund democracy delivering for people? Like, do you have any philosophical underpinnings about how grant making reinforces that sort of strategy? Anything, any wisdom you can share with us that would help us understand like how to fund this? And I'll start with you, Rafe.
Well, it's hard. For the longest time, we considered proposals that came to us, and picked the ones that were the best and didn't accept the others. Lately, we've turned more toward commissioned research, which goes a little bit of what Jessica was talking about, of saying what we want to find out, the kind of work we want to have done, and then asking who would like to conduct that. And that's how this big USC project happened. We put out that we wanted this work on outcomes to happen because it was hard to get the proposals to align with how focused we were on
Mm,
improving governance and improving democracy. I'd say you'll find the following. In the governance space, you won't get enough proposals. In the democracy space, you'll get too many. And with the governance one, it's really hard to generate good proposals and projects because governance is really a hard thing for people to relate to. It's about structures and things like that. But everybody's got an idea about democracy. So you actually have the flip side problem there, which is you hate to say no to what seems like a good idea, but the odds are there are too many good ideas out there. And the question I will often ask people, which sometimes can be kind of annoying, is okay, if you make a bigger table, that's great. What's the table going to do next with that bigger table? And people say, well, actually, I'm only interested in making the table bigger. Automatically, better decisions will be made at the governance level. That's really probably not true. So we all have to deal with the tremendous interest in democracy projects and pulling out the ones that will really help solve the problems, not just of popular support, but of government performance. They're there, but I'll tell you, it's a lot of work. And on the governance side, it's the flip side, finding enough good proposals.
Boy, I couldn't agree more with that. I think it really varies too, depending on what is the size and scale of the systems that you're working with. I'll also shout out, we have in Pennsylvania funder partners at the Haynes endowments that we work with frequently on a number of both democracy and governance related projects. The work they do on local government in Allegheny County is totally different from what we're doing in the city of Philadelphia because Allegheny County is a county with some 40 odd municipalities in it, including the city of Pittsburgh, and we are one large city in one county. And so trying to move a system that is a single large entity is just a different effort than signing on, 5 or 6 small municipalities to work on something together. Thanks, Alex. 130 municipalities. I didn't want to say that because it sounded absurdly high, but actually it's true. Um,
Oh, Alex.
yeah. So I think I think to Rafe's point about good proposals on governance, it definitely is a challenge. I think people working in local government, it's important to remember that like people working in local government are us. They're also nonprofit workers. They're also funders. They're also civically minded people who are just trying to do the best they can with something. And sometimes bureaucracy really gets in the way of being able to do the work they want to do. Sometimes the priorities are set at the highest levels and carried out below them. And that means some of the great ideas for how you might improve something just cannot be brought to life right now if it
Mhm.
does not have the executive sponsorship behind it. Um, and I'm a really strong believer as a funder that even though there's an important role for advocacy and community organizations to play in holding government accountable, our funding cannot be entirely to groups to tell the city that they're bad. It
Mhm.
has to be also to people doing the work inside to make it better.
You're getting a lot of head nods. You're getting a lot of head nods for that one, Jessica. Very astute point, very helpful. Okay, so I've teased it enough. We're gonna go to Ask Me Anything. Feel free to raise your hand in the Zoom chat or go ahead and just come off mute and ask. But the floor is yours. What questions are on your minds related to how to fund democracy delivering for people, what democracy delivering for people means and looks like? Would love to hear from folks in this room.
Amy, Micah has a question in the chat that I think
Ooh.
would be good to turn to.
Okay. And of course, my husband is printing something right now while I came off mute. Okay. Micah, how do you determine when you must address a civic emergency with out of cycle funding versus maintaining the integrity and trustworthiness in your competitive grant process? Do you have examples, scandals perhaps, but not necessarily, of times you all funded work that addressed civic emergencies? That's a great question, Micah. Rafe or Jessica, do you guys have thoughts on this one?
Well, because we're a relatively small foundation and there's some gigantic foundations in our region that have resources for services and for emergency funding, we tend not to be the place people go to that. But when they do come to us, we encourage them to come to us with how governance structures could better address, say, wildfire recovery. And we have given some support, and not 5 years down the road, but immediate support for even at some point setting up ad hoc governance structures to help the region recover from wildfires. But the lesson of that for us is that we keep it within our mission and don't become something that we're not. Now, other foundations on the call, that are supporting more direct services, it's hard to not provide support when it's needed. I think the trick is not to become an enduring support when government needs to get tax revenue and other sources to be able to carry out programs.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think I'll add too that, well, first, a question, Micah, if you want to add while I'm answering this, like, what are you thinking of in terms of civic emergencies? Like, what does a civic emergency mean to you in this sense? And maybe while you go ahead.
Well, I'll just give you a very concrete example from this week here in Rhode Island. We have
Yeah.
upcoming primary elections, and we have a local news organization that wants to do all this amazing coverage of those elections. I don't think it rises to the level of like, we need to get out there and pump resources into this one municipal election cycle. They could have applied for that in our kind of normal grant making cycle. And yet I do believe that like we want to practice having like hygienic elections, and like this is a good organization who's going to do some of that work. So I ended up saying no, and then now it's gone over my head, and I hope we will say no ultimately. But I just wondered like, oh man, like I would feel differently if there was an imminent threat of safety at the polls. Like that to me is like, okay, we need poll watchers, we need some other mechanism
Yeah.
that's not on the table. It's just like you want to do great stuff at community libraries with candidate forums, like love it, great. But like apply in the grant cycle, you knew the election was coming. You know what I mean? Like the
Yeah.
distinction there.
Yeah. I can't really add anything to that. I agree with your assessment of that. I think true civic emergencies are actually pretty rare, but they're not we knew this opportunity was coming and we have a great idea kind of late in the cycle. There's certainly a place for that. If you had extra funding sitting around, like why wouldn't you want to invest in a smart opportunity that could do something cool? But I'm going to guess that if you're like most funders, you don't have extra money just sitting around waiting for a pop-up opportunity.
Alex, I see your hand, but I first want to just see if Stephanie could come off mute on this thread where you shared your experience with SEPTA. Can you share more about that and how you thought about funding in that crisis?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think we very much think about the provision of the services that people rely on that are like the foundation of our systems, right? Like you could, I mean, and I actually think you could expand this like the conversation broadly to like the cost of living crisis. Like, what are the things that people are most struggling with? For us as a foundation, we're focused on mobility and access, and so that is where this comes down for us. But it's about, and I think that Matt and I were going back and forth in the chat, is that there is this like like things need to be delivered that people need. Like that is the nexus of delivery and democracy, or a democratic process. And the way that people experience our democracy is through the way that government delivers things. And so what we, to answer the recent question, we did emergency funding deployed to civic groups in the Philadelphia region and across the state when SEPTA service was cut because of the stalemate in the Pennsylvania legislature, as it always is, and that cut service about 40%. And you saw the kids just literally couldn't get to school. The absentee rates went up like 40, 50% overnight, literally. And they needed the state, the legislature, and frankly, the governor had to take executive action to move money to SEPTA to reinstate the service. And the situation is not solved. It still is a crisis of civic agency, of government responsiveness and delivery. And so it was important to us in that moment, like to be to enable the civic organizations that had a voice to have extra capacity to surround sound the governor, to really double down on like you have to create political risk for him in that moment. And that was kind of where we determined. And we actually we reserve funds specifically for these kinds of moments where there is needed push for political action or civic action that pushes policy. And that's kind of how we have operated. And I think that is actually, unfortunately, increasingly more necessary as every state budget is squeezed and squeezed. And also, our political divides have gotten ideologically ridiculously more separated. And, our legislatures across the board, I'm a Pennsylvania resident, that they're just ideological. Like they're not even for people. It's not even about what people need anymore. And there needs to be more political pressure to act.
Right. Yeah. Thanks, Stephanie. Alex, let's turn to you. What question or reflection do you have for us? And hello.
Hello. Thanks, Raphe and Jessica. This is really interesting to hear your thoughts on this issue. I don't have a super pointed question, but I was hoping, Raphe, that you could talk a little bit more about this distinction you were making between governance and democracy. I think that's really interesting, especially in the context of responsive local government and thinking about how, as funders, we can help local governments improve their effectiveness and capacity. Is that what you're thinking when you're talking about governance, as opposed to maybe some more of the community-based engagement, advocacy work? Like, can you give some other examples in addition to the USC work where you're describing it as governance?
Sure. I think you said it very well, and I think it's two pieces of we call it democratic governance, basically, as opposed to authoritarian governance, honestly, if we're comparing. And what it means is the voice of the people, and I think Jessica said it, delivering the services people want and need is one side of it. The other is, what are the systems by which those services are delivered? And I wouldn't say that government is agitating to have more people coming to make more demands on them, but they have to be able to listen to those and have to be willing to listen to those. And it's also true that members of the community are not always interested in hearing about the difficulties of delivering services from the side of the government. So it's almost a place where philanthropy can be kind of a trusted partner to both, because they're not necessarily partners for each other all the time. And sometimes community wants are very inconvenient for existing systems. Sometimes existing systems are having trouble delivering things, even if they want to deliver them. And then there's not a lot of information around. Um, so I think it's the systems of government and the community engagement, which is the kind of secret sauce. But how do you bring it to life so that people aren't designing democratic solutions in isolation from governance, and the government's just making its day-to-day decisions with pro forma things like public meetings where you get 30 seconds to berate the government, and the less time you get, the more you berate them. And then people say, why should we listen to these people that yell at us? And then the people in the audience say, they're not listening to us. They're on their phones when we're talking. Some of you are nodding and have been to a city council meeting lately. It's really not healthy, but I think philanthropy can be a trusted partner in the middle, as long as we're not an agent of just one side or the other of what we hope would be a very successful marriage. Now we're doing marriage counseling. I'm running out of metaphors, so I'm sorry, but
Jessica, anything to add to that?
No, that's great.
And Jane, I see your question statement in the chat too, and I think you got at this a little bit, Rafe, but curious if you have like something on this particular lens of it. Is like Jane's interested in the line between governance and democracy and what interventions cross or blur that line. So you said you're kind of in the middle as philanthropy in this marriage counseling situation, but where does philanthropy, or where would you surmise philanthropy acts in a way that might blur that line, or just other actors that blur that line?
I want to blur those lines as much as possible.
Oh, okay.
I think right now they're not blurred, they're too blurred. They're not blurred enough
Hmm.
because government tends to operate in its world, except when they're forced out of their comfort zone. And people outside the government world, are trying to get in and figure out how to change things. But it's that blurring that actually is the hope. The blurring is that if somebody says in LA we should increase the city council to 100 members instead of 15, because that would be greater representation, somebody in the room says, yes, but then how will that council make decisions? And it's wonderful when you hear that from community people, which we're starting to hear in LA because charter reform is getting people engaged. They say maybe 100 is too much. So I say blur the line. This is an artificial line in a system of democratic governance.
Yeah, and I'd also add, I think that there are a number of ways to envision, and a number of organizations and people who work on like, how could the governance systems be different? How could they? I think we've got some people on this call who work on that all the time. And that's where I see another space where blurring the lines between democracy and governance is inviting the will of the people to be involved in thinking about how the system should work. Like, how do we actually have a different system? Not just how do we make the system that we have work better, which is one aspect of funding government to deliver, but how do we actually change the system to be more effective is, I don't know, another aspect of that I think really more directly touches democracy as well.
Mm-hmm.
Other reflections or questions from the group?
I have just one reflection, I think,
Go for it.
about this nexus, but it's a little half-baked, so bear with me. It's, I am a Pennsylvania resident, but I just moved here from New York City, and was, in New York as a New York City voter, as Mamdani was running, and when he was elected. And I think that a lot of what is happening in New York City is this nexus between governance and listening, and civic engagement and agency in shaping the priorities of the agenda of the government. And what was interesting about like the campaign is that there weren't these like very traditional methods of engagement, right? Where you like sat down in rooms and you're like, what do you care about? Like he he engaged a broad organizations already doing this work all across the city, and then synthesized those. And so because people are saying all the time what they're struggling with, like we know what people are struggling with largely. I mean, it is reflective in the presidential elections and the local elections, and I think it's this question again of like how are people in government listening or not listening? How are they engaging in performative solutions to show that they are quote listening and then not doing anything? And what is the role of philanthropy in helping to triangulate all of those pieces? Because Mamdani really showed that he was listening, developed an agenda, and said, government is supposed to be doing all of these things. And people were like, yes. And some people said no. And then he started to say, like, these are my priorities. This is what I'm doing. And it has, he's not holding like 500 public meetings all across the city, but he is doing strategic and tactical engagement where people feel like they can be heard and that government has actually an agenda because people are busy. Like, I had a conversation with our the cleaner in our office where she was complaining about how her workforce can't get to work anymore, and she thinks government should just step out of it, like they should just step out, and she didn't understand a pathway to what was happening, what she could do, how she could engage, and the disillusionment was so strong. And the feeling that government should just exit, but not an idea of what could be replaced. And I think to me, that's actually a little scary, is like what could be replaced, what could replace it, or the lack of an identification of what could replace it because of, a lot of the privatization that has happened in this country. But anyway, I think about a lot of those things. Is like, what about what is happening in New York City is showing how government can both listen, be responsive, and deliver on the things that it already knows that people are struggling with. And then what is the role of philanthropy in continuing to create places where people can build community and engage and have a voice, and also like, yeah, what are these new ways that government needs to be responsive, that have need to be revitalized that we don't have yet. And it feels like there is this combination that everyone on this call seems to be doing of like investing in organizing, investing in like actual governance reform wherever that can happen, and problem identification, or maybe it's uplifting. But anyway, those were a bunch of thoughts.
Thanks, Stephanie. And for those of you who don't know, Stephanie runs the Transit Center Foundation, and they're doing a lot of work in how like transportation delivers for people. I think you probably could have surmised that from her comments. So in addition to Raphe and Jessica, just another great resource in this democracy delivering conversation. Thanks, Stephanie. Matt, you came off mute. Did you want to add to the conversation?
Well, yes, and then I got into a whole different. I'm going to put the whole point about New York is fascinating. We just had an event in New York City on Wednesday night at the Volunteer Forum at Columbia, where we kind of released this research we've been doing in partnership with the Civic Engagement Commission in New York City, which is a very interesting structural piece that not many cities have, which is worth looking at it, and it was created by the voters a few years ago, and still kind of finding its way in its role in democracy, and still trying to figure out how to work with the incoming administration. So it's a fascinating time to be thinking about like New York City and where it is. So I'll put that in the chat. But what I was going to say just quickly is that I think part of the thing we need to be clear about in this conversation is what do we actually really mean by delivering, and that it can't just be about filling potholes and deliver public services. I mean, there's a kind of a Ezra Klein, version of this argument and this abundance argument, and I may be oversimplifying it, but basically it's kind of saying, well, government spends too much time listening to people and too much time surveying people and having bad meetings. They should just go ahead and do stuff and build things and ignore people and use eminent domain and stuff like that. And I think that's a recipe for disaster. Because people won't sit still for that anymore. 21st century people won't still sit. And then also kind of fundamentally misunderstands the problem in the ways that Raphe and Jessica are pointing out. This is not just about getting stuff done, because in fact, our 100-year-old systems are pretty good at that. That's what they were created for 100 years ago. And my organization, Civically, was part of that era of reform. It was about how do you introduce professionalism into public life and expertise and insulate it from the electeds and to kind of defeat the corruption mainly in cities. So it was good for that. And has delivered a lot of stuff over a long period of time. But those systems are fundamentally out of step with how we live today. I mean, people today are different and the systems need to adapt because people are much more educated, they're less deferential to authority, and they have the internet. And so that means you can't just deliver for them. They won't even know that you've done that. You have to have a relationship with them, which is why I like your marriage metaphor, where people are continually getting information and giving information, because that's how people learn, as opposed to just, it gets lost in this blizzard of data that we live in all the time. So it's kind of figuring out how the systems can change so that those interactions between citizens and government, which are the most out-of-date part of it. I mean, Klein's right about that. And you were just saying, both of you, the meetings that are terrible, the 3 minutes with the microphone, all of this. I mean, and some of those are leftover things from that earlier wave of reforms. Mm-hmm. But that is the part of our system that's completely decrepit, needs to be, created, and needs to be, it needs to kind of take advantage of what, Jessica, you were saying about the people's capacity for civic action. They have to have the chance to be heard. They have to have a chance to actually do stuff to solve problems. And that's those reforms, those changes are absolutely possible. We know they work. But it's still a big question of structure. And we can't allow this sort of argument to be oversimplified to the idea that government simply never, fills potholes and never provides public services, which is what some people want to make this conversation all about.
Well said. So we're nearing the end of our hour, and I take seriously my job to end on time for you all. So I'm going to ask one last question to Jessica and one to Raphe, and we'll start to close up here. Jessica, you're 2 years in. What does your board think about this area of work? Kind of what's their reaction a couple years in?
Yeah, good question, Amy, because this was definitely an area of funding that they were like, well, stakeholders said that we need to do it, then I guess we'll do it. But so I want to give them number one credit for that, for building something into our program funding strategy that was like not really on their radar and not their priority when they went into it, but community said we need it. And so they said, okay, we'll do it. I think that we're only, like you said, only 2 years in. We've just done a couple rounds of the RFP-based funding to do responsive, accountable local government. So far, they've been very much in a like, I'm along for the ride vibe. We understand these projects are not done yet. We don't know what they have achieved, delivered, accomplished, run into walls about. And, the risk of opening a whole can of worms. We had a mayoral administration change right between when we developed this and when we launched the funding. So the situation that grantees are working in is very, very different now than when we first designed it. So that's also an element that we're talking a lot with the board about, is how organizations are learning about new ways to have influence and reach decision makers.
Yep. You also had a basketball team change. Congrats on LeBron.
I don't want to talk about
Sorry, Ray. Just realized this is maybe bad. That's really helpful to know. And I think more of a like, let's stay, I want to learn more, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, massive credit to your board. And I think continuing to kind of see as this evolves. Raphe, the last question I have for you is I would love if you have any advice about like, how do you stay current in your thinking and how to approach this work? Like, what are the resources, the things you turn to get smart in how to fund in a way that democracy delivers and local responsive government?
Can I answer a different question?
Yeah, answer any question you want, really.
I want to leave you with a thought about hope for democracy that's much missing. We're in phase 2, and there's a phase 3 to come. The first one, democracy, was massively overconfident after the fall of the Berlin Wall. Nothing to compete with, a rosy road ahead forever, not very hard work. Why put the work in to make it any better? Now, with the rise of authoritarianism, we're suddenly demoralized and constantly feeling on the back foot for democracy, like it really doesn't have a chance. Reminds me of the way people thought in the 1930s. It didn't end up that way, as you know. And it turns out that authoritarianism has a lot of weaknesses of its own. To go to what Matt's saying, they can make a ton of decisions, very often wrong decisions, that there is no feedback loop on, and that usually is what causes them a problem. Consider that what happened in Hungary, the survival of the Ukraine. There are many things going on in the world showing the resilience of democracy. And it's not just about delivering services, it's about having a little bit of confidence in how governance and how democratic governance presents itself to the world. We don't have to be apologizing all the time. We shouldn't always let the perfect be the end, the danger to the good because of democracy competing against itself. Honestly, in a competitive environment, you just have to be better than the alternative. And that's actually a lower bar than having a perfect democracy. I hear a lot of my friends saying it's horrible in LA because we haven't solved all the problems of democracy and governance. Welcome to city politics. Nobody gives you credit for anything when things are going well. They only know there's a problem when things are going poorly. But there is one sign that I grew up with in New Jersey that had a profound effect on me. We always talk about communication, about governance. The best communication sign ever in human history. It's called Your Tax Dollars at Work.
Yeah.
There was never a project in New Jersey down to a new library that didn't have a sign on it that said Your Tax Dollars at Work.
Right.
That message says we ain't perfect, but we built this thing. So that you don't have people say, yeah, we got that library, but I don't know who put that up. It was probably Microsoft. You can't hold out for people loving the government. When you call a private company and you get good customer service, you think that's a really good company. When you go to a government agency or a public healthcare worker and they do good work for you, you say, what a great person.
Mm.
You don't say, boy, I like the Department of Motor Vehicles because I had a good experience with the person there. That's the hill you have to climb. So don't hold that out as the goal of true popularity. However, democracy, well governed, still has a lot of miles left on that car. And so put a little bit of that confidence into what you do with your work, our work, with our collective work.
That was a much better note to end on than podcast recommendation. So thank you, Rafe. That was really profound. Rafe and Jessica, thank you so much for letting us tap into your wisdom and your expertise as you're on this journey, kind of flying the plane as you're building it. And we are thankful that you let us kind of peek inside. I want to thank you all for joining. We will share Jessica and Ray's contact information in the follow-up email you'll receive tomorrow in case you do want to follow up for more conversation. And PACE members on this call, we hope you have our fall member meeting on your calendar, November 17 through 19 in Detroit. Registration will be opening in September, as well as more fall programming opportunities will be announced in early September as well. But we hope you have a great summer and last couple of weeks of it. And thank you so much for being here today. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Amy.
Thanks, Amy.
Take care.